Good morning. Okay. Hello. Yes, this works. This is wonderful. New sound system. Well, welcome to this disruption event sponsored by Tech Titans and the Blackstone Launchpad. My name is Ty Harmon. I'm one of the 3 tri-chairs of the Tech Titans Innovation and Disruption group or special interest group. Unfortunately, Jeff Novak cannot be here today due to a personal emergency. He is the innovation officer at Comerica Bank, and he's the one that's really kind of been driving a lot of the program that we're going to see today, as within the banking and financial services industry, avatars, VR has become a very strong play for customer service and support. Also, Ann Sachs from TI, she's responsible for TI's DLP business. She travels extensively in that role. She is unable today, but the 3 of us basically are responsible for making sure that we provide information, awareness, best practices about how organizations can identify, test, and drive adoption of emerging capabilities. Today we're hosted by Blackstone. Unfortunately, Brian Chambers is not here. How many people know Brian? Know of Brian? Yeah, a lot of us do. So Brian has a central role within the Texas ecosystem, the North Texas ecosystem, that's been centered around helping to drive entrepreneurship here out of the UTD campus, as well as supporting the DEC, Dallas Entrepreneurial Center, and some of the things that are ongoing at Capital Factory as well. So I think I may just go without this mic, or do I need the mic for the recording?
The mic helps.
The mic helps a little bit, even though it cuts out. All right. All right, so today we have a pretty good lineup. I'm not going to get into it because we're going to actually use the technology to introduce everybody. But the structure for the day is a series of presentations. There'll be questions that everybody will be able to answer, and then we have some hands-on demonstrations. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Straub for the introductions.
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Dr. Carrie Straub, and I am going to actually show you our technology and introduce the speakers that way. So thank you for bearing with us. We're having a little bit of audio issues with the microphone. For what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring some friends of mine up here, so bear with me 1 second. So what you're looking at here are some virtual reality avatars, and I'm going to talk about how this technology works later on in the day. I'm a little concerned because the mic needs to be on for you to hear them, and so as it cuts out, you're probably going to have a hard time hearing them. So we'll do the first introduction this way, and if the mic keeps cutting out, we'll go old school and just have a real person introduce rather than an avatar. So I'm going to put this on speaker for just 1 second. So you guys want to introduce yourselves to the group?
Darius, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello there, everybody. My name is Darius. I'm an avatar here at Mursion. Good job. Highly recommend.
So let's start with the first introduction, which is myself. Let's see how it works. If it cuts out, we'll switch over to the other way.
All right. So here we have Dr. Carrie Straub, the Executive Director of Education Programs at Mursion. So Dr. Straub is responsible for leading the design and implementation of immersive learning among Mursion's 80+ partners. She provides guidance and consultation to faculty, researchers, and other educators about how best to leverage virtual reality simulation to elevate those soft skills for high-stakes professions. Previously, she was the research director for Teach Live, the project at UCF that originally developed and tested core technology utilized by Mursion. In that capacity, she planned, directed, and coordinated activities for a $1.5 million national research study funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to discover whether practice in the virtual environment could produce measurable changes in performance and outperform more traditional professional development methods.
So that's quite a mouthful. That's my background. I want to be sure we have Juan Alvarez. You're here. Over here, Juan. Do you want to stand up and we'll have the avatar introduce you as well?
Hello, Mr. Alvarez. has worked in the display technology industry for over 10 years. He holds a production engineering degree from EAFIT University in Medellin, Colombia, and a Master of Business Administration for SMU, Dallas, Texas. He has held a number of leadership positions since joining TI in 1999, and has authored a wide variety of technical articles, white papers, blogs, and online videos, including a recent online training video for wearable displays for TI DLP Pico technology. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his wife and his children.
You guys hearing this okay? Or should I switch over to a live first?
But I enjoy my time with my family. Oh yes, I do.
So we have Jerome. There's Jerome.
Hello.
This is Jerome Stembridge. I want to keep doing it like this. I don't know how the audio is for you guys. I want to be responsive to the group. If not, I'm happy to introduce Jerome. It's hard to hear. Okay. So what we're going to do, I'm going to say goodbye to my friends right now, and I think what we'll do is I'm going to bring Jerome up, and I'm sorry, Jerome, if you could stand up for me. So I'm going to go ahead and do the introduction myself. Thank you so much for improvising with technology today. Tech Titans, here we are. So, okay, so Jerome Stembridge is a senior solutions specialist with Samsung's Electronics for Mobility and Enterprise Solutions. Jerome has extensive experience in solving cross-vertical business challenges with proven results. We'd like to see those results. With over 20 years in the wireless industry, he is an expert in the areas of mobility strategy, connected technologies, IoT, business critical and mission critical, proactive services with a practical knowledge in industry standards in IT best practices. Thank you, Jerome. We look forward to hearing from you. And Lance Losberg, are you in the house? There's Lance. Hi, Lance. Thank you all. So Lance has an impressive track record with over 20 years of extensive hands-on experience in creating and developing innovative, interactive, immersive content, virtual reality systems, and technology. What am I doing differently? Virtual reality systems and technology enterprises. As one of the world's foremost VR experts, so we're lucky to have him in the room, he pioneered and was responsible for the launch of the first ever immersive VR 360 video application for commercial use in 1999. Pretty cool. Prior to founding Big 360, Losberg was a co-founder and executive director of San Diego, California, based Decision Sciences Corporation, DSC. He was instrumental in the development of DSC with its core focus of developing 21st century technology to detect potential nuclear threats and counterterrorism. Thank you for that work. Lance earned a S degree from Arizona State University. Okay, so as we've gone over, we've got this lineup of speakers here. Thank you all for working with us with the technology. We have had a little bit of audio issues. I'm going to pop over into my presentation, so just bear with me for one moment. Okay, so basically, I'm going to kick off our discussion today about technology. Our company has some applications in virtual reality, so I'm going to start in the space that we're at, and then we'll move into the VR. I know this group is excited about learning about the newest innovations in XR, so augmented reality, virtual reality, and also mixed reality. How many of you are already using some form of XR in your work? How many of you are seeing applications that potentially you could, so you're out gathering more information? Okay, now how many of you have looked at it in terms of developing social skills versus technical skills? Has anybody heard of VR for social intelligence? Oh good, okay. It'll be an easy crowd then. So just to set the context a little bit, our company Mursion, really we're here to improve human interactions. That's why we come to work every day. I'm a former school teacher and became an educational researcher researching this technology at the university where it was invented, at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And we commercialized as a company about 3 or 4 years ago, and so now we are out there in the world kind of sharing this news. So one of the things that we focus on, like I said, is really improving human interactions, and we think that better employee engagement results in better business. So it can cost the U.S. it costs between $450 billion to $550 billion a year for lost productivity. I'm sure you guys have seen this type of things at your work. Productivity, your customer service might be low. People's even understanding of the concept. People that are not engaged at work only understand the content of the things that they're selling. They have a limited understanding of what they find. So even just basically knowing what your products are, if you're not engaged at work, you don't even know what you're selling or working on. They find that, and how many of you, maybe you don't have to raise your hand, you don't have to say this, but if you've had a boss before that maybe you just really didn't like working for that person, they find that managers and supervisors actually account for about 70% of that variance. So if you've got a great boss, that's great, you want to stay. But if you don't like the way that your boss interacts with you, it can cause you to not become engaged in your job. And so I want to just highlight this because this is fascinating to us. If you look about halfway through, half of that chart is they're not even doing these social interpersonal skills. Managers aren't even doing basic things like listening and responding with empathy. So we want to help people improve their empathy skills. And you're probably like, how is VR going to do that? But we'll talk about that technology in a little bit. Again, looking at management skills, only 13% of employees think their managers are good at communicating with them. So this is a real problem. 13% of people said, yeah, they can communicate effectively. And it's only going to get more pronounced. So as automation can automate more and more things, the social skills that are needed to be successful those jobs are going to become more and more in demand. So this is trailing information, this is information in the past, but the trends are continuing. As you can see there, routine tasks, less and less, fewer and fewer jobs are requiring those skills. What we're finding is that empathy is really key, and that soft skills can be trained. Some people think, oh, you're just born being good with people. But that's not necessarily true. We don't agree. We think that you can improve people's soft skills. Even a child with autism can get better at listening and responding. And we can help people develop their empathy. We've done some initial pilot work in that. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to talk about that later. But basically what they're finding that, this was a study that was done and reported out in Chief Learning Officer, that soft skills investment for every, I think it's $1,100 spent, you get about $4,000 of a return on your investment. So these skills, we don't like the name soft, right? Because it sounds like, well, it's not, it's not hard, it's not the technical skills that are really important, but they're finding that those contribute just as equally to a company's success. So that's why we care. That's why we care about that and why we're here talking about it. So how do you currently develop your employees' soft skills? Who here has any type of soft skills training or social skills training, social intelligence? What do you guys do for that?
Something in the past is what I did.
Okay. What was it? What type of activity did they do?
Role playing.
Role playing. Okay. Who here has done role play before? Who here likes role play? He does. All right. So role play. A lot of people tell us that they break character in a role play. And getting professional actors that don't break character like that, thank you, what a gentleman. Chivalry, a lot of people tell us that role play, they feel awkward and uncomfortable, and that they have a hard time kind of buying into the interaction. And what we find as a learning designer, and I'm a former teacher, your learning is interrupted in the learning experience in a role play. So if you're role playing, we're role playing together, and I know like later on we're gonna go to lunch, so I'm gonna give you a really hard time and kind of be funny about it. Now all of a sudden the learning experience and the skills that you were supposed to be developing are kind of out the window. So that's one of the flaws with role play, and also you have to be in the same room. If not, you're doing it on Skype or something like that. And then it's hard to have it be convincing and have this sense of presence and like realistic kind of buy-in to the situation. The other thing is videos or coaching. So the issue with those things are, if we're talking about demonstrating skills in interaction, you can't watch a video and demonstrate, like, okay, yeah, when push comes to shove, I know how to give hard feedback to someone because I watched the video and I chose the multiple choice answer. That doesn't really work together. So we kept saying, like, what is a way that we can give a safe practice space for people to come in and actually practice? And we were looking at virtual reality. So when we're talking about simulation, there's a bunch of different training options that you can use. This is like a spectrum of different options. So we come to this side, which is role play, coaching. The human component is front and center. And then we go all the way to the other side, which is like highly scalable, technology-enabled videos, adaptive learning, micro-learning things. But actually, those are cheap at scale, but are they effective? You know, if we're really looking for something that is going to be effective and move that needle on your performance and help you get better at interpersonal skills, what is that watching a video going to do, or a branching scenario going to do? When push comes to shove, like I said, if we want to get better and not escalate a conflict, but we actually want to resolve it, we need practice. So right now, the way we get practice is usually on the job. And this comes from, when this technology was invented, they actually did it with teachers practicing. So I'm sure many of you guys can think back to your years in school. You might have had a bad teacher, you might have had also a wonderful teacher. So teachers really have an impact on children. So we said, okay, let's find a way to simulate a classroom. And we would simulate the 5 avatar children and give teachers a chance to go in and practice dealing with bad behaviors so that they wouldn't escalate a situation, they could resolve it. So we had to that was our use case. That was the thing that we had to be able to do, the proof of concept. And we got funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we actually were able to develop, we were able to demonstrate significant outcomes and compared to colleagues that had similar training. So we said, okay, we're onto something with virtual reality. This is Jerome Bailenson. Is anybody familiar with his work? Okay, good. So Jeremy is a researcher at Stanford, and he's kind of like the guru of VR in some ways. He's on our board, so of course I'm biased. But he's got another company that you all might have heard of that founded Striver. Is anybody familiar with Striver? So Striver's the group that's taking all the 3D headsets with Walmart and doing that work. They're STRIVR, if anybody's interested. Striver is really doing some cool stuff with athletes. So they'll have them go in a full 360 video, watch different plays, and get better and better by practicing. So that's something that they've got, and they're also doing this work with Walmart. So what Jeremy found out is that if you do something in a virtual setting, that can change your behavior in the real world. And he was specifically looking at empathy. So he did what we call this superhero study. And what he did was he said, okay, in this virtual space, he had 2 conditions. So the first one, you would fly through the air through this city, and you just had to fly around for 10 minutes, and then you would land. In the experimental condition, you fly through the city, but you had to take medicine to a young girl, and you had to find her within the 10 minutes, and then you land and give her the medicine. So he had all of his participants go through and do this interaction, but the real test was at the end. They do this typical thing in social sciences called the empathy test, where they put a can of pens out, and so the participants would walk out into the hall afterwards, and they think they were all done. And all of a sudden, the test was, you'd have somebody that was involved and knock over the pens, and the participants would be tested on how quickly they picked up the pens and how many pens they helped out with. That's like a measure of empathy. It's kind of a funny one. But what they found was that the people who had just done the condition where they were saving the young woman and flying through space to give her the medicine, they were faster to help and pick up the pens, and they picked up more pens, significantly more than the people that had just flown around for 10 minutes. Interesting. So they said, okay, there's something here in a virtual space. What it's doing is it's enacting those same neural pathways, and that's why we're finding more and more applications for virtual reality. So it puts you in these hyper-real situations where you can have risk at the same time, but actually you're doing it in a safe way, but you're still firing those same neural connections that in learning is taking place back in the real world. So we were saying, okay, how can we stress test people and inoculate them to the stress for these high stakes situations that they have to be authentic and present to really do any learning. And we think that virtual reality is the way to go. So the reason for that, there's a bunch of different reasons. We think it's more effective than role play because it's immersive. And that's where our company gets the name from Mursion. It's a word play. Basically, we engage the emotional and the kinesthetic and the cognitive parts of your learning all at the same time so that it feels realistic. We can also target it and specifically focus on a scenario. And we can practice this over and over, which this is very interesting. So in our work with Amazon, we're working with them as one of our partners now, their managers will come on, they get a half-day training when they first get hired, and then in the afternoon you think that, okay, now they'll start doing these management scenarios and do their role plays, but they found that it's very expensive. It's expensive, they don't know that they're getting that lift 6 months later, are they still seeing those changes in performance? So what they'll do is they'll sign on and have them practice with the avatars once a month for 3 or 4 months. And what it does is it targets to a specific skill that they want, and they're spacing out learning over time. So that dosage actually has better effects than just a one and done training. And they also can get some immediate feedback. So you guys saw the avatars today. Those avatars can also give you feedback on your performance. So what we found in our research, we were funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do 2 national studies, and I was the lead researcher on that. We found that 4 10-minute sessions in the simulator changed the targeted behavior, and they significantly outperformed their colleagues. So 40 minutes of learning allowed them to go back into their workspace and change their performance. And this was on complex tasks like questioning. Yes, sir?
Just wondering if you've done work on the persistence of that learning versus point in time.
We need more money. No. But yeah, they call it the persistence or stickiness or dosage. Yes, we're doing a research study right now that's founded by the Schusterman Foundation and with AIR. I don't know if you're familiar with American Institutes for Research. So they're looking at like the long-term effects. And it's funny, Amazon, that was one of their first questions, is how much dosage do we need to give to demonstrate those effects? And they were finding that if you just did 1 or 2, after a few months, the effects would go away. So you have to space it in certain intervals. Like the research indicates if you have to basically at 20% intervals for whatever that targeted skill is that you're looking for. So I just wanted to give you kind of a visual. We saw it was a little clunky this morning. Technology issues, I floundered a little bit, but and you're also looking at it on a larger screen. So typically, there's a few different use cases. So here you've got a gentleman who's actually doing a sales pitch to 3 C-level, C-suite executives, excuse me. So they're coming up with some objections that he has to counteract and talk about. That's me over there. I'm being a front desk agent. This is from our work with Best Western, and we had a custom environment with them, and he's complaining about the air conditioning, and he's freezing in his room. And then we have a gentleman here that's in a VR headset. So imagine this is in a fully VR experience. This is where we get to this question of mixed reality, virtual reality, this whole concept of XR. So I do a lot of conferences. I like to talk about the work that we do, so they send me to all these conferences. And we have a VR headset in our booth. And they come like flies, moths to a flame. And they're just like, they're so excited about it. But when they've signed up for services, they want services. No one wants to spend the money on the headsets right now. Everybody thinks they're exciting, but for this type of work, we're not convinced that it's really necessary. And the companies that we're working with are not investing at that level just because of the cost associated with it. So you get an idea. The interesting thing about this technology is because, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how it works, because we merge a human and software, it's artificial and human intelligence merged into the same system, it feels very real and authentic. So I want you to imagine, we have what we call a blended approach, and there are some sites that are doing this. So whenever you think of avatars, I want you guys to kind of ask the question behind that. What's driving those avatars? If it's a branching scenario that you can kind of figure out the right answer to, it's probably entirely AI that's driving it. And AI is at a place where, like Alexa, state-of-the-art AI, I think that if you were to take Alexa and try to improve your social skills with her, it probably wouldn't be effective. If anything, I've seen people get worse when they interact with Alexa. Like, shut up, Alexa, shut up, my mother-in-law with Alexa. It's like, Alexa, what are you know, it's, people get frustrated with it. Alexa's not at a place yet where we can do a nuanced interaction and really, remember I showed you that slide before, take an escalation and turn it into a resolution. So what we do is we say, all right, let's let AI do the lifting where it can, and we'll have a system where the system that you were seeing before, there were 2 avatars being operated by 1 person. So the AI can allow them to operate up to 5 avatars at the same time in a simulation. And they're getting video and audio, and the system's doing some basic analytics on the interaction. And the learners can experience the VR simulations as a small group or individually. It just depends. There's a bunch of different formats. As machine learning gets better, it will be able to help us predict, as we have more and more data, it will be able to help us predict what a good performance is going, what good performance looks like, excuse me. So I wanted to give a specific case study of somebody that we worked with and who's implementing virtual reality. So if anybody's familiar with Best Western, they swept the mid-level, I think it's called mid-range hotel category for their customer service. And the area that they really stood out in was problem solving. And they credit that to this technology, which basically they took 12,000 of their front desk agents, and we're continuing to work onboarding with all of their front desk agents. And they said, all right, we're gonna put them through 10-minute simulations. So they would do a 10-minute simulation dealing with an angry customer, and then they grouped them into the groups that had the training and the groups that had not. They halved them. So you had about 400 in each group. And they found that the Net Promoter Scores were the strongest jump ever in their brand history with the sites that had the simulation. So it's basically you're giving somebody a chance to actually practice and do. And that's why I like this simulation. You're seeing these gains in performance because, okay, so you're practicing in a virtual setting. Your learning's still going to take place in the real setting. And we also saw that 97% of hotels were highly satisfied, and that's something that we see in the trainings with these interactions. That's pretty common for us. So, anybody has any questions? Please feel free to email me there or my cell phone number. But I have a few time for questions. Sir?
Whose avatar backend to use, and has Amazon tried to get you to use Sumerian?
So we're using Unity as our engine. And as we go further up the chain at Amazon, I'm sure, like we've definitely seen Sumerian and our people are looking at it.
Yeah,
but
that's really good.
Yeah, our designers like it. We have a proprietary, basically because our system can be operated by a person as well, there's an additional layer in our engine right now, and I'm at the extent of my knowledge. Yes, sir.
So you're sort of hyping the term VR, but in reality, what you guys are really offering is the specific interaction training and the person running that. VR is just simply a little handy tool.
Platform, yeah.
So, and that's kind of my point, is it's not really VR that's doing it, it's really your knowledge of the problem and how you handle the interactions.
Yeah, it's a simulation. It's a simulation, and we call ourselves like an XR company because we can do VR, but like I said, everybody wants the MR. They want mixed reality because they can look on a laptop or on an iPad, and they don't need to spend money on equipment, and they're still seeing a change in performance. I've got 5 minutes left, sir.
Quick question. I was in your watching the video. There was some issues with the lip sync, it's not quite. Is that an issue?
So I think that's it's a part of the equipment that we're on and the bandwidth in this specific instance. I think it was just one of those. I was trying to do a workaround up here, but yeah. So if you installed our software directly onto the system and you're running with the equipment at spec, then you don't see the lip sync issue. But that is an area. Our CEO, if he were here, he'd be like, oh, beside himself, because he's always focused on the lip sync issue, and it's something.
I found that people
Distracted.
Distracted.
Yeah.
Because that's going to happen. Bad versus that on the training itself.
Yeah, I would say this is probably a pretty bad version of it. I was like, oh, I'll show the group, let's see, I don't want to not show them VR, but the lip sync issue is something that normally we don't have a use case like that. We have smaller equipment that's up to, and you don't see it, but yes, I feel your pain. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Are you seeing a lot of competition in this area?
No, I think people probably are confused about what we do right now because of the fact that they see avatars, so they think it's a typical branching scenario that's run by AI entirely. So there are people that are doing some things with AI, like they're like public speaking apps or things like that. There's no direct competition that we have, but I think that will change at some point pretty soon.
I was just at the VR/AR conference in Vancouver, and there was a small company up there who was doing it specifically aimed at assisted living and memory care employees. It's really amazing to get them to develop empathy for their clients.
I wonder if we just signed a contract with a group out of Tennessee that's doing that. They're in Vancouver? Okay. In California. Okay, so it might be us. I don't know, that might be us, because we did just, who knows? But we have, so there's a bunch of different social applications of this as well. We've got, we just signed this group called 10 Cares, and so basically all of the people that do assisted living care and work with patients that are going through dementia and issues like that, Medicare is willing to certify them if they can pass a simulation, so they can earn a higher wage by demonstrating proficiency in a simulation. That was the project, so it might be a different one. I want to be sensitive to everybody's time, but thank you all. Thanks for bearing with me in the clunky technology in the beginning. Everybody was so gracious for our avatars. I just wanted you to get a chance to see them, but typically I don't hold my gut to my cell phone and try and work around like that. It's just one of those mornings. So, all right, thank you.
I'm not sure.
Hello, good morning.
So, a couple of things. First of all, my name is Juan Alvarez. You probably know that already. And just gonna give you a little bit of background myself. Just very simple. I deal day in and day out with customers that are developing augmented reality systems. So the objective of my presentation is mainly going to be focused on hardware. Hardware. Nothing to do with application. Hopefully, this will give you some insight about what path in terms of AR and VR is going moving forward. So I have a couple of questions before we get started because I really want to understand a little bit more about you all. First of all, are you in the industrial market? Industrial, personal electronics? Enterprise. And then what else? Automotive? You're in the industry. What's going on? Oh, what industry are you in? Software?
Yeah, software.
All right. Anyway, that kind of gives me an idea. And the other thing is, how techy are you? From 1 to 5. 5, I'm extremely techy. 1, I am not techy at all. 3, right in the middle. 2, okay, that's good to know. And then third is, how much do you know about VR and AR? 5, I really know a lot about VR and AR. Just let's go back into it. 1 is, I really don't know anything about VR and AR. And then 3, right in the middle. Okay. So how we start this is, who has an iPad here? Who has an iPhone? Or at least a phone? All right, so the difference here is that the iPad is really as needed and when needed. But the iPhone or the phone is always with you. And if you look at the market, there's a lot of forecasts out there, but ultimately today, VR definitely dominates in terms of shipments, but in terms of years out, augmented reality is going to be a dominant player, about 70% dominant player. From our revenues and all that, I think digital capital is a good key term. You may want to look it up. And the reason why is exactly this. It's always with you. Go ahead.
Can you put a time frame on that?
I will not commit to a time frame because that's a difficult thing. I mean, but I would say maybe like 5 years. 5 years is when we think that, not we think, but the market thinks that it's probably going to be where augmented reality hits the sweet spot. Still a little bit farther away. So, when needed, VR. And then with you all the time. And obviously there are a bunch of applications, and I want to be clear, VR and AR, both of them are really, really, really important. And so VR, for example, just talk about simulation, that is very applicable. But for AR, you even talk about consumer mixed reality, where somebody's going to take a pair of glasses, especially in your 40s, and then go from there and then be able to use this everywhere you go. So just to give you, for those that actually are more in the one, I'm just going to give you a very quick overview. VR means that there's no reality around you. Everything is digital. Everything is pixels around you. And there's actually two classes. Number one is more of an ambient type of class, and then number two is immersive. The difference there is not just about the display or the content, it's really about the sensors. You really have to feel that that shark is right on you, and it's almost like breathing on you. That is immersive. The other is more like looking at a game or looking at something, and that's the difference. And then similarly for AR, the one below, which is ambient, is mainly informational. So just like one plane, you get information. Let's say you go into the field, you're trying to repair some pipe, and this information tells you, where to do it, how to do it, and you move on. The upper one, mixed reality, really has to take care about immersing that experience with your real life. And that means that if you're back there in that chair and an avatar shows up, that avatar needs to look like it's part of the room. And that's a big difference, and it's really difficult to attain. And so what we're going to focus here are on considerations, display considerations for augmented reality, just to be clear. So there are a couple of things. One is it has to be comfortable. I mean, think about it. If you're going to wear all this long, it has to be comfortable, it has to be light, it has to be something that you want to wear. And then secondly, it has to be real. And meaning that when you go and look back at that chair, you have to believe there's somebody there. It really has to be real. And then finally, it has to be useful. And I understand that there's going to be a couple of presentations here from a couple of folks that will talk about usefulness. And the good news is usefulness has started. I mean, both Apple and Google are heavily investing in that with ARKit and also with the AR Core. And on top of that, a lot of the companies now are starting to add sensors, which adds to the usefulness as well. So I'm not going to focus on usefulness, at least from an application point of view. I'm going to focus on hardware. So the first thing is comfort. So there are a couple of variables to comfort. The first one is size. I mean, obviously, you have to make it as small as possible. And there are two key variables around this. The first one is the imager size. So there's actually an imager that is right there, that is very small, and the smaller, the better, because the smaller, you can actually make these things smaller. But the second one, which is counter to the first one, is field of view. Field of view can be defined of how much of that digital space I have in my line of sight. So like 20 degree or 40 degree or 100 degree. To give you an idea, on VR, we're talking about a 90 degree. You're completely, but in VR, you're really talking about 30 degree or 40 degree. And later on, we're gonna have a demo where you're gonna see a real augmented reality set. So these two things oppose. Smaller means smaller field of view. So these two things are always opposite to each other. The second one is motion. And when I talk about motion, is that means you're gonna walk around. And when you walk around, you have some digital thing around you. And if it's not fast enough, guess what? You're gonna feel nauseous. I mean, you're gonna feel like really, really bad. And so for VR today, that sweet spot is 90 frames per second. So companies today have decided that 90 frames per second is like that sweet spot for VR. And then secondly is the lag time. And the lag time, I kind of wanted to demonstrate having a drone right there with an airplane. That's probably the best picture I could have gotten. And the point here is, let's say you're manning a drone remotely, and there you go. The drone has a camera, and then the camera sees the airplane. And guess what? If that lag is 2 seconds, your drone is completely crashed against that airplane. So the lag time is really, really critical as well. And then finally, it has to last. And last is defined as twofold. First is battery. So how much battery consumption ideally, if you look at all these devices, they have to last like at least 1 day so you can recharge them. And so obviously power is a huge key consideration, specifically for the display. Because the display is the one that takes the most amount of power. I mean, 1 watt, 2 watts, that's what the display is gonna take about. And then finally, built to last. It has to be durable. If it's not durable, then you're gonna be pretty disappointed. And for durability, we're really talking about the durability of the imagery itself. Because the imagery is one of those key components that has to last for a long, long, long time. I mean, that is probably the most difficult component in the whole entire system. Now, in terms of size, I just want to talk about just very briefly about 2 different architectures. There are 2 optical architectures. The first one is the one that a pilot has, which is called a combiner. What this is there's a projection that goes into a transparent, transparent material called a combiner. And that transparent material called a combiner reflects the image towards your eyes, and it creates a virtual, kind of like a virtual image in front of you. So that's one methodology. The second one is waveguide. And waveguide, it takes a long time to explain, but in simple terms, a waveguide is when you have a projection optics. The waveguide is a piece of glass that will move light to get it in front of your eyes. And this is the most common implementation that you see. So most of the companies use waveguide technology. Now, the trade-off is waveguides are extremely inefficient from a power point of view. And to give you an idea, we're talking about 5% efficiency. That means that whatever light comes through, only 5% of the light goes through and creates an image. For the combiner, it's very efficient, extremely efficient. There's no loss. Unfortunately, it's huge. So there's this kind of trade-off. And what has happened is that waveguide has become the de facto standard for the industry. So now the other thing is you have to make it real. And to make it real, the first thing that needs to happen is that it has to be image quality. I mean, think about it. If the image quality is lousy, then it's going to be a pretty poor experience. And I've seen a couple of those. So you really need to focus on image quality. And then secondly, pixels. How much resolution you have is important. And that doesn't mean that it has to be 1080p or 4K or whatever have you. It doesn't really have to be that way. But it does have to have enough resolution on your field of view to be useful. Just to give you an idea, one of the demos there has NHD, which is like 1/9 of HD, and it still looks really good because the field of view kind of lines up. And so resolution is an important criteria. Now immersion, in my mind, is probably one of the most important criteria for mixed reality or for this type of experience. And immersion is translated from a technical point of view to contrast. And contrast allows, what it does really allow, is it allows to make that image transparent. So where you don't want to have any data or any object, you want to make sure that that data is completely transparent. It would be really awful to see everything around and then you see a big square around where the imagery is. So transparency really adds to that experience. And then finally, this is more of a software and application implementation, which is exactly what I was talking at the beginning, which is, hey, you need to make sure that whatever objects you have become non-transparent where they sit down, but they actually acknowledge all the positions they're in, the field of view, the depth. All of these things have to be acknowledged. So that's why I showed the guy behind the fence. If you had a fence and you have an avatar showing up, the avatar cannot just be there in the middle. It has to really be positioned in the right place. And depth. So for depth, there are two points here. Number one, and I kind of show this instrumentation because what I want to share is sometimes if you just want to share data, an informational dashboard in front of you may be perfectly fine. I mean, that may be suiting your needs perfectly fine. But secondly, if you really want to have an immersive, extended, I cannot call it extreme, extended experience, then we're really talking about depth. And that's what we're going to focus on just now. So what is the issue? The issue is called convergence accommodation conflict. And that is the real issue. And this is a pretty fancy word for the following. So let's say you're trying to watch an object, right? You're trying to see an object in space. And then your eye will focus on that object, right? Now, let's say you use 3D stereoscopic, which is what everybody likes. And then what happens is you have a display. You have a panel, a display, something in front of you. And guess what happens? Your eyes tries to focus on the real object, which is a display. It has nothing to do with the image. And that gap between the object and the display, that's what is called convergence accommodation conflict. Ideally, your focus of your eye should be in tune where the object is located. And that creates discomfort, the nausea, fatigue, you name it. That's why some people, when they go watch a 3D movie, they just can't. My wife is one of them. I have not seen a 3D movie like in 10 years. And so there are two kind of like, how we solve this problem. The first way is you put two views. So this view, you have the doll here with a close focus, and it's you can see that it's completely focused on the doll. And then you have that view in front of you. And then you have another view that has a completely different focal plane. So the focal plane is right to be far away, even farther away than that, because you can see that the drawer starts to see a little bit of focus. So you try to have front view and back view, and then through algorithms you try to combine that to make you comfortable. And so that's one implementation. So this is probably the start of getting to that position. And one of the companies, if you want to hear about a company that has done this in a very well fashion, the company name is called Avegant. A-V-E-G-A-N-T. Avegant. It's one of these companies that has really done this in a good way. But in my mind, or in everybody's mind, this does not 100% solve the problem. And so what's the key here? Again, speed. Why? Because if you want to be able to produce images that go at 60 frames per second, let's say, you have to go at double the speed. You have to go double the speed to be able to, with one projection unit, be able to get both at the same time. So what you do is you go to 120 hertz. A lot of people do it for 3D. They go at 127, 60 hertz for one eye, 60 hertz for the other. So that's what you do. But again, this may not be the end. So where is the end? Where the end we feel is between 4 to 6 views. And again, this is just to represent like a very picturesque way of showing that you may have different views in different steps. So you would have one very close, and then you would have one far away, and somewhere in between. From a technical, go ahead.
Sorry, so if you're left or right eye dominant, and you've got the hertz on different eyes, and then you start to see further, right?
No, you don't see it, because the key, so your question was, if you're left or right dominant, are you going to start to see the difference? And it really depends about the speed. So the eye will integrate. It doesn't matter, the eye is pretty slow compared to 120 hertz or 360 hertz. And at that point of time, it doesn't matter if it's left eye or right eye, the eye will integrate those type, and will try to solve those type of issues.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Is that really an eye issue, or is that a brain issue? Because the eye moves much slower than the brain is always trying to adjust those parallax.
Got it, yes.
So is that really a processing speed issue or a lens focus issue?
It is a lens focus issue, and so I don't know if it comes from the brain or directly from the eye. I mean, I really don't know, but it's definitely a lens issue, and how you're able to focus from one point to the other. It's definitely a lens issue. I mean, all right, and then from a technical point of view, just for fun, just to kind of here, we talk about diopters, and then here the 6 planes that we feel are critical. The first one is at 33 centimeters, the second one at 42, the 56, 83, 167, and then infinite. Infinite means that everything is flat. So it's flat. It doesn't matter when you look at infinite, it's really flat. It's just everything looks the same. But this is, if you had to implement something like this would be the frames or the field that you would put there together. So, hey, if we had a wish list on how to do this, the
first thing is you want to make it comfortable, right? So comfort is important. So how do you achieve comfortness?
Small imager, big field of view, and high optical efficiency, because the waveguide is a dominant play on this architecture. High efficiency is really, really critical. And then for making it real, you really have to minimize the vergence accumulation conflict. I mean, if you don't solve that, you're going to have a lot of issues with people wearing this across the board. It's just not going to be comfortable at all. Then great image quality, and then we talked about that. And finally, high contrast to make sure that the image is transparent. So we are, Texas Instruments, now you probably, now it's like, okay, where's Juan from? So I'm from DLP Products, and I am specifically in the DLP Pico team, and although everybody thinks that we're in calculators, well, we actually have a lot of different businesses, and one of them is the DLP business. And in the DLP business, we have the Pico business, and in that business, we are fortunately the dominant player. We're about 90% share in that space, and the reason why we are in that, with that position is because of the following. We really match pretty well the requirements of this wish list. We are extremely small, but actually that picture is real. It's that small, about 2.2 inch diagonal for the active array. We can enable small form factors. We are the most efficient, optically efficient technology out there. We have the highest contrast ratios. We have the best LED saturated colors, and because of cinema, we actually spawn all that knowledge and being able to bring that knowledge even to Pico displays. So in this case, yes, we feel that we have an advantage. And finally, fast switching speeds. So if we talk about 6 fields, and I didn't acknowledge that, but for 6 fields, you're really talking about 360 frames per second. So we can go really, really fast, and nobody else can. And so, what is the roadmap? So for VR, we started with a phone. I don't even remember everybody putting their phone on and adding the little thing there. Now it became more specialty, and so now there are specific, VR systems that are designed for that, and typically it has to go above and beyond 90 hertz. If you don't have a VR system that is above and beyond 90 hertz, don't even buy it. It's probably worthless. And then finally, cameras are starting to emulate the world. So you're starting to see Microsoft and others come up with systems where you have a camera, and the camera shows you the real world. That's one position, and I'm not a fan of looking at things through pixels, but that actually is trying to solve the problem of being able to address the real world through VR. And then finally, our belief is VR is interesting, it's this big, how can we make it like really small? Because we make it much more of a comfortable type of wear, and we feel that in the long term, there is a path to do that. Now for AR, you started with Google Glass, and if you know that experience, it didn't go well. It had a color breakup, people didn't like it. It just, power, it had a lot of issues where it just declined. But then people went with monocular, like one field type of positions that we're having information, and you'll see 2 of these examples there. Oh, 1 example there. Actually 2 examples there. And then finally, 2 fields. We talk about 2 fields, and then 2 fields, you have like that. In my mind, like XR version number 1. And so for 2 fields, then that's where we are today with Avant and some other solutions out there. But we really believe that this XR2 second generation is going to be with 6 fields. That's when you really, really are going to solve these vergence accumulation conflict. And that's in time. So it's not tomorrow, it's not the next year, it's probably going to be a couple of years away. And we can never predict the future, it's difficult.
So fields are presentations of different depths?
Yes, different depths. And it's interesting because you actually have to make it like really right to make sure that you create the impression of something is solid and something transparent. It is quite an ordeal from a software and from a hardware point of view. All right, that's it. Okay, go ahead.
Quick question. So that's 6 fields installed, and you have to focus on the power.
Oh yeah, so it's 6 fields really solves that problem, because now your eye, depending on what you're trying to focus on,
is going to be able to look at a different field. For real, it's not like you're doing this simulation. You are actually focusing your eye in the right places.
You have to make that as you move, right?
And then, yeah, of course, and as you move and everything has to be maintained, it has to be high frequency to
Be able to be the
That
right.
requires eye gaze sensors as well.
It requires,
well, that's another way. Yeah, that's right. Well, that could be one technique
that could be done for it, because if you know
how your eye is wide or small, then you can probably judge where people are trying to go focus. That
You're not doing that.
No, yeah, and nobody is. I think nobody is doing that right now. What people are doing as today is just trying to understand where your eye is going to. And that's probably as much as people are going on right now.
And then finally, so the good news is
The reality,
OXR reality is today. It's not in the future.
View 6 is a great example of that. Is being used, like for example, in this case for a dentist office. And in the future,
Maybe that's the future. Maybe where we go off and today we wear our earbuds, maybe tomorrow we wear our augmented glass and then we go on and that's part of our life. And so that is it. Any questions?
One question. So you talk a lot about XR, and this is all indoor applications. And then if you look at the camera sensors that provide that field, that information about the ambient environment, and then overlay data, we're finding that glare, lighting conditions, ambient lighting conditions really just crush AR in a lot of industrial use cases. Can you
Great
share a
point.
little bit about this?
Oh yeah, for sure. The great point, by the way.
and that's another key point. So AR is not really
Really just about indoor. It is about indoor.
and outdoor. And typically how you address that problem is by dimming. So depending on if you're indoor, you have to have a sensor and then you dim down your brightness. But if you go outdoor, then you have to
To kind of make it brighter. And so that means that the technology has to be dimming capable. Because if it's not dimming capable, then if you go indoors and you still have this bright thing on top of you, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable.
But yes, it is possible. And in fact, yes, these demos demonstrate that. Like for example, the DigiLens is being used for a motorcycle head-up display, which is only used outdoors. And so yes, it can be addressed. AR definitely addresses the indoor and outdoor problem.
Any other questions?
By the way, there is a app now if you want to find your way around the campus. There's an XR or an AR app called Kepler. It's developed by a former student, or actually they were students here last year. Won the second place in the Big Idea competition. But there's an app. You download Kepler, and when you walk around campus, it'll tell you what the buildings are and lead you to your destination. Next time on Check Night, we need to send out the Kepler app link.
Yes, we're always willing to improve. If you're not improving, then you're falling behind. So now we have Jerome who's coming up. Let's get set up real here. Just as, again, to set expectations, there's fresh coffee on the way. 10 more minutes, bear with us. If you need that 4th, 5th, or maybe 10th cup, then you'll be able to go. While he's getting set up, anybody have any lessons learned from your own experience in doing these types of experiments or deploying the technology within your own environments? Anybody who's done this? Has anybody done it at all? To deploy AR, VR, XR in their own environment? We're building products for it.
I did hear about these guys using at Porsche dealers now all over the country. They're using AR. They have glasses. I can't remember who the manufacturer is, but they're doing when they're working on your engines and stuff like that. They can communicate to corporate headquarters, Porsche, to answer questions and help them guidance if they have an issue.
Perfect. Right, so it'll reach back to technical resources. So if you think about Tier 1, Tier 2 maintenance support, they can reach back into more subject matter experts or specialty
You got
teams.
it right there. Got a camera and
Okay.
We didn't get a chance to platform.
What's platform 1?
Second.
Very good. And then the other experience that we have had is that, back to that lighting issue, is that if you're trying to look into a maintenance bay of an equipment, then lighting is an issue. If the camera can't see the object, then that's a problem. The other thing is that if you go outside and you have something called the sun, and if it's, especially here in Texas, if it's very bright, it washes that sensor out. So that input in terms of how the extended reality or augmented reality is being able to see the world around them. If it's not able to see the world around them, you can't overlay information on it as well. So we've seen some interesting use cases where Looking at Macy's Bay, if it's not illuminated properly, you're not going to get the information. The other kind of big challenge that we've seen is some of these industrial systems are a mixture of lots of different versions of lots of different equipment. And so it goes back to the software side of, do you have the capability inside of your own system to be able to recognize that that's an air compressor, if that's an air compressor, what version of air compressor it is, and be able to provide information. So there's a lot more complexity on how you display information and how you present information, especially if it's on an endpoint, to be able to leverage. So there are those considerations that are out there also. Anybody else see anything playing at home with your kids? No? How we doing? A little bit more time. Tap dance. Always. So anybody have plans this year, or you're looking at your budgets for 2019, where you're actually thinking about, I need to be able to start moving in this space and allocating some resources to be able to do some design, some experiments around these types of issues? Anybody? No. Does anybody have an experimentation? One. We have one in here. Okay? So those are some considerations also. This is an emerging technology. I think from our VR, XR experts that are here, what has kind of been the challenge you've seen internally? Because everyone sees this, we're reading about it, we're hearing about it in the news. That doesn't mean your executives are ready to pull the trigger on funding this effort. So what do you see as the gaps within your own organizations about how to move this from a concept or insight into a technology into something that you're actually leveraging within your own organization? Anybody have any experience of breaking through that barrier with the executives to get the funding and resources to be able to move forward in this space? Do we need another cup of coffee? I'm running out of bullets here. I can keep going. I can keep going. I can drive this.
I think from the perspective of large manufacturer that we work for, we should find
Yeah. Yeah. It's a change management process, right? So anybody who tries to adopt new technology, generally speaking, you've got about 60% of your organization that's just going to wait and watch, and if it's actually meaningful, we'll actually do something. 30% will fight you tooth and nail and will never change, and 10% are your problem children that are ready to change tomorrow and you're not moving fast enough. So that adoption curve is a big thing. We also see a very difference in adoption, to your point, about if you have very seasoned workers, very experienced workers that know how to do this function and that are not as experienced with this type of new technology, they may hate it because they don't think they need it. That young worker who's coming into the workforce who doesn't have that experience, they absolutely are wanting it because they don't have any resources there to help them when they actually move through this.
That's also the issue of how you bring in this technology without impacting the outcome.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it will be a resource like
Sure. So a great question about how do you actually bring in new technology, whether it's AR or exoskeletons or autonomous vehicles or whatever the case may be, to be able to not disrupt current operations, but give people awareness and an experiential learning process to say, here's how this technology will be applied.
Ready.
We got fire. And without further ado, I'll turn off the drone.
Thank you so much. Apologies for the delay. And I also understand why the late Bob Barker never liked the corded microphone. Anybody remember Price is Right?
Yes.
In his memoirs and in his books, he never liked to use a cordless microphone because he never wanted dead spots or interference. Did you know that? See, I watched a lot of television. But good morning. Let me ask this question. How many of you are responsible for training employees? Employee training. Onboarding. dealing with any kind of product upgrades or updates for your employees, where you are responsible for them getting the latest knowledge on whatever it is that's being rolled out or student learning. That might not be much many in here, but within the industry, especially business, they're now looking at different ways that they can enhance employee experience. One of the things I'm going to talk about today is what's happening in the enterprise space, where virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality is playing a much larger role. For some of us, depending on your age, our first experiences with any kind of reality manipulation may have been on Star Trek. I remember the first time I saw Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they walked into the holodeck, and it was these hard light 3D images that they were able to converse with. If they, made a certain move or gesture, it would know how to respond. Physically, they could do different things, and I would always say that was so cool. But then that wasn't anything that we were dealing with at the time. For some of us, our changes in reality manipulation also may have come when the first time we bought one of those dream machines that you would put by your bedside, and it'd play the sound of the rainforest in order for you to go to sleep, or would drive your significant other crazy because they would hear frogs and everything else making all that noise. Those were ways that we found to manipulate our current reality as a means to escape, to get away, to bring comfort, ways that we would use it for pain management. First time I went to my dentist, and she took a look and said, well, you grind your teeth. She said, get yourself a dream machine, listen to it at night. Whatever you're dreaming about, the music or the sound will then begin to allow you to relax better. These were ways that we did it for healthcare, pain management, for wellness, so many different ways. But now what we're seeing in the area of virtual reality, mixed reality, and so forth, is how businesses are now transforming the way their employees work, the way their employees learn, even customer engagements. For some of what you saw earlier and what you'll see from one of our partners is the ways that retail banks are now looking at using virtual reality as a means to use for customer education. Customer walks into the bank, they can give them a virtual headset, and now they can take a walk around the bank and its various products. I have one financial institution, I deal in the finance and insurance space, and what they're using virtual reality for is for new hires. When they come on board, they've used our Samsung Enterprise 360 camera to develop content on their building for disaster recovery, mass shootings, and so forth. But they put the VR headset on a new hire, and it walks them through the entire facility so they know where the staircases are. They know which elevator to choose. Whereas years ago, your company may have had to color code all of the exits and so forth. Now it's beginning to do a different kind of transition the way businesses are doing it with virtual reality. And as some of us know, virtual reality is an interactive computer-generated experience within a simulated environment. And what VR technology for a lot of us has been seen in the gaming industry. The first time I played with a VR headset in that game, Call of Duty, that a lot of our younger people play, or you might play at 3 o'clock in the morning and the time goes by, it allows you to be in the middle of the game. So if you turn your head, you're turning and seeing everyone behind you. First time I played, I was playing with my nephew who is in New York and I live in New Jersey, and we were playing, and I kept trying to figure out who was shooting me in the back. And as I turned around, there was his avatar holding the gun, and he was just letting loose. And I said, hey, I typed, we're on the same team. He said, in Call of Duty, there are no teams. But this is the way it's been in entertainment. But now we're starting to see it more and more in business. As the gentleman talked about the hardware, from a perspective, Samsung makes these goggles that go on you get a Gear VR headset, and you're able to download into your Samsung mobile device content from developers such as Netflix, where you can watch movies in virtual reality with the headset, where you're sitting on the sofa and you're actually watching one of your favorite movies in surround sound, and you can turn around and it has artificial living room space that you're able to see all of this. That's where it's been in the entertainment space. But when it gets into the business side, it's now being developed more and more to transform environments and experiences. And so these are a few of the virtual experiences that are in the business arena. A lot of us may be familiar. Anyone here mountain climb? Right? As you can tell, that's not where I'd be. But with a VR headset, I can actually have the same experience he has, with the exception of the bitter, brutal cold, my muscles aching, and my fear for my life. I can have the same experience without leaving my home. You can visit more locations. Insurance companies are now developing content that allows them, because a lot are looking at the cost of sending an adjuster out to a location to spend 5, 6, 7 days, where now they can go and they can take and send one person to take video content, and then they can look at it in virtual reality. As well as bank virtual reality, as she did the avatars. Imagine you walk into your bank and there's a long line and you don't have the time to sit down and talk about the latest products and what interest rates are and things of that nature. They can actually link you with someone through virtual reality where you can have a conversation with that person and be able to develop and know what it is you want to buy, saving you time as well as your customers, using it for training. Even student learning. A lot of schools are now looking at ways that they can enhance student learning. For many of our young people going into the classroom now, especially those that have anxiety disorders, and they're really studying more and more, now they can learn at home with a virtual headset and be part of the classroom experience. So we're seeing it in education. We're seeing it in healthcare for pain management. A couple of months ago, we developed a marketing program around virtual reality where they used one of the wounded warriors, and part of his rehabilitation of walking with his prosthetic device, they put a VR headset on him so he was able to walk with it as though he was walking in the virtual reality space that helped with his training. So there's so many different ways in healthcare, experiences, insurance, and even in retail banking. So you'll see it more and more in these areas. So virtual reality, that augmented experience or augmented environments. There was content that was developed. Anyone here ever swim with sharks? You just are the adventure man. We gotta go on vacation with you. But swimming with sharks, there's virtual content developed through the Samsung store where you can even experience what it's like to swim with sharks, never having to leave your home. These are different ways that people are developing. Connected home. On this one here, virtual environments for, on the far end, that's a medical office where you can see all of the content that's in there. Amazon is even utilizing virtual reality from a business perspective for inventory and control management. For a business that wants to know what inventory is there, how to pull it, not just from the computer, but also you can have content developed where you can train new associates on walking through the warehouse and where everything is. So this is part of reducing those high costs of bringing on a new employee, taking them through training, architectural design, designing a building, and giving a virtual walkthrough. First time I ever went on the computer when my wife and I were looking for our home, and we would do all those virtual walkthroughs where you would drive through a neighborhood and the sign might say, want to see this house? Go to www.whatever.com and you could do this kind of three-dimensional walkthrough. Now virtual reality allows you can put on your headset, download realty listings, and walk through the entire home from the basement all the way down as though you're touching and opening up the doors because they've developed that kind of content. So these are just ways in those areas. This here is the ecosystem for virtual reality. So Samsung is involved in application and content development. That's everything that you're able to download through a VR store for healthcare, for education, and for other kinds of enterprises. And then the tools and the platforms that you would use, Oculus headset, the new Galaxy devices that we're developing, ways that you're able to get your content and take it with you everywhere, even support on different ends for infrastructure and components. A lot of businesses, you don't have the technology, you don't have the resources to develop your own content. Just last week, Microsoft did the Ignite conference. And at the Ignite conference, they're talking a lot about cloud development. They're talking a lot about mobile device management, Office 360, and bringing those worlds together in the cloud space. As you develop different ways to do business, someone has to host it, someone has to develop it, someone has to manage it. So you're looking at all these different areas when it comes to it. Applications and content, tools, what are you using for it? What's the hardware? And then the infrastructure. How do you really support this? How do you know what's out there? Who's out there? How do you know the best in class? That's what businesses are dealing with. And one of the major reasons is the revenue stream that virtual reality will bring in the coming years. These are projections just based off of the space for virtual reality. Revenue shipments, just a portion of the United States by itself is over $500 million. But we'll be looking by the year 2025 at $5.4 billion is what virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, all of that is going to bring into the enterprise space. Companies are now starting to invest more. Educational institutions are investing more. How many people here work from home? Right? Why do you think your company said, if you would work for a large company, work from home? How much does it cost to keep a desk that you're never going to use? You know, people are now using shared workspace. Your meetings at one time were either conference or video driven. Now, in order to connect with more people, companies are saying virtual reality and things of that nature are going to play a much larger role. That's why they're starting to invest more and more into. This slide here is about the portfolio that supports enterprise business. So of course there's your platforms, VR enterprise stores, enterprise mobility management, device management, ways that you're going to get the information out to your end users, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a smartphone, your headsets and so forth. The accessories, all of this is going to contribute to how VR is going to be a revenue driver across different verticals and platforms, from hardware down to the solutions and the content that's out there. And so that's my last slide. I'd like to introduce one of our partners that I have here with us today. In this space, when it gets into the areas of content, management, development, and so forth, and what businesses are doing, Samsung has a great partner which is called Big Look 360. And what they do, and he's going to speak a little bit more about it, is content development in that enterprise space. How can you take advantage of all that's going on beyond what we see today? As I mentioned, gaming, and it drove that industry in which now more application developers are not just doing it from the space of a game console, but now they're doing it on a smartphone. For Samsung, for instance, the game Fortnite. Anyone here ever play it? Who has kids or grandkids who play Fortnite? Right? I didn't understand what it was. We actually, on our new Galaxy Note 9, you can download Fortnite. First time I did it, I looked up and it was about 4 hours later. I was playing it. I said, wow, what a waste of time. But I said, imagine what companies are really doing when they give it to their employees and say, this is what we want to use now as your training manual. 25 years ago, my first job, they handed me a binder and said, this is everything you want to learn about the company. 5 pages in, I was done. I said, I learned enough. Now you can give someone a VR headset and it walks them through that entire experience. So I'm going to bring up Lance right now, who's going to speak to you about Big Look 360.
Can everybody hear me okay if I just speak up? This mic is driving me crazy for you guys going in and out. Is that okay? Thanks, Jerome, and pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I thought you would be 5 minutes, but it took a little longer. And quite honestly, a lot of the things that already been said, I just think we've done it in some aspects. So I'm going to keep it real brief, and then maybe if you have any questions. But I kind of wanted to just touch on the real world as far as this XR, which is VR, it's AR, it's MR, or blended, and the 360 video, which I haven't heard yet this morning, which we've done for years. 3D, 2D, 360, and so all those acronyms and initials. So basically, we're talking a technology that we're trying to immerse people into to provide as close to a real world experience as possible. And it's just been shown through psychologists using it for having people overcome phobias, fear heights, fear of flying, public speaking, or even PTSD for soldiers coming back from war, to overcoming that. It's a very powerful medium. And to combine all these different technologies together or use them in an effective way to, in essence, help your companies become more powerful, better. And also, bottom line, how does it save me money? How do I make money with it? How does it make my company better overall, my employees better? And there's many, many different ways that we can touch on. We've already seen a lot of examples. We've done real world experiences from using it as a sales and marketing tool for hotel chains, new concepts where instead of having to fly people into a facility or a location, they can go to them now. They can use a VR headset or various types of things and give these virtual tours, educating on different products, usage for trainings was mentioned, and on and on. The applications are really endless. Somebody mentioned earlier about the adoption or why people were resistant to get into using these technologies for their companies. And a lot of this is the unknown. And as like Juan mentioned earlier, all these different display technologies and the complexities that are involved. I mean, it can be a little bit daunting if you're not really familiar with how do you manage content with hardware and devices? How do I make it useful for my people? And how do I make it effective? What if something goes wrong or breaks down? So there's a lot of different variables to overcome. And I've been in VR since the early 90s when it was all blocky animation, and you had giant headsets, and you stood in pods, and we all had games, and we evolved over time, and where it went from all animation to where somebody approached me and said, from the military, said, this is great stuff, we'd like to use it, but can you make the animation? We don't want cartoons, we want real people. So we devised a way to shoot 360-degree video and made it real people. Now you lose the interactivity as far as being able to move in that environment, but you can at least look around and everything looks real. So you have all these things that go on. And then we get to AR, where you're out in the field or whatever it may be, you have a device with you, you have a piece of equipment, you want to, what is it, how do I use it? If I can replace parts, you hold the device up where you have a heads-up display, head mount, and it tracks and reads that device, and then it gives you, annotates different items of what that device does, how it operates, what the parts are, and so on. So again, I think for every business there's a use case, and we've done many, many of them over the years, and that's what I was going to kind of run through. It's all kind of touched on this kind of things. Training is opened up; it's becoming huge. We're actually launching a new training for athletics, primarily starting with the quarterback training, where you actually sit behind the line of scrimmage, and as you look over, the play develops, and we're giving you the ability to view it from the quarterback's eyes. And then as the play goes, we also synchronize that view with an overhead, so you can kind of shift up and see over top of the line and get a bird's eye view. Oh, am I making my decision? And that's a lot of part of the process too. So technology is faster and better decision making. It's been shown that the technology increases comprehension, and it also you get people are retaining information better, and it's simplifying complex data. So all these things lead to more of a cost savings when it comes to training, or if it's in sales presentations where they don't miss out on certain things. It's more effective, and putting people in environments that they're actually there without physically having to go is a very powerful tool overall. So other than that, I mean, like I said, a lot of stuff I could say go on. It's fairly redundant. What I'd like to do is, if anybody has any questions or use cases or ideas of how could this be useful in my company, or you have a problem and that you think that this might be able to resolve the technology or variations of it, and take an approach in that respect. And like I said, we can go through some use cases of what we have. So if you have any questions of what you've seen so far, or how to use it, what the technology involves, issues, problems, anything like that. Okay. Yes.
How prevalent is the use of 4K live streaming video? I've seen a few cameras in the market.
Right.
But I'm maybe on the sites on
4K live streaming. Okay, so that's a great question. And what you have a follow on that? He asked about 4K live streaming. So, we had standard definition, then we had HD, and now we're going into 4K or Ultra HD. And, and it starts with the content. So what good is it as a device or a screen or a headset or whatever to support 4K unless you're getting a 4K image coming at you? And that's a lot of the problems that we see. We're moving up to 6K and 8K, which, So to answer your question is, initially we were doing a standard definition live streaming about 8 or 9 years ago. If you guys are from here, when they blew up Texas Stadium, they demolished and blew it up, we had a 360 camera in the middle of it as it was being blown up. That was standard definition. But it looked pretty good. And we had nothing else to compare it to relative wise. And then we moved to HD, which is, it's all about the bandwidth and then also the internet capabilities and so on. So within devices as well. So 4K live streaming, yes, we 4K live stream now. There are cameras available there and packages. We've been doing it for a while. The issue with 4K live streaming is, the higher the resolution, obviously the more data you gotta move. And then where is it going to, and then what device are you watching on? So if you have a device, and if it's your phone, and you're putting in your headset or reading your headset or whatever it may be, is even though you're streaming at 4K, it's got to be transcoded or down converted to be an HD or whatever that display device is. So you kind of lose the effect. Now, it's always better to start off with more resolution and down convert in that respect. But yes, it is available. It's being done. It's becoming more prevalent, more supported through the whole infrastructure from capture to distribution.
What's the bandwidth for a 4K stream? What kind of bandwidth do you need for a continuous 4K stream?
Probably that 15 to 20 megabits is going up. That's kind of like where we start at, somewhere in there. For HD, you can go down to 5 to 10, depending. Again, and don't people get caught up in resolution too. And I've seen this because I've done this for so long, is where the content is really the compelling aspect. It's great to have, real crisp, high resolution content, to imagery to see. But if the content is compelling, it goes away. I mean, if you watch Gone in the Wind in black and white, it's as good as it was, 50 years ago as it is today. I mean, or whatever, whatever the show or the movie or whatever you're watching. So it's, people get caught up so much in the resolution. Yes, it's great to have. It costs more. It's hard to maintain at the time, but it's getting better and better. Love to have it, but it's not always the primary source. My suggestion is focus more on what you're watching as far as in the content side, the message is being delivered, what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to the resolution. High resolution, the better. But
I have one more question.
So you mentioned slow adoption being basically the unknowns. One of the things that we ran into as a company when we wanted to go down the VR, XR space was it's very partisan. You had hardware companies, you had software companies, and your plans to solve different companies, and then send it to the software company. So is it becoming where you can reach out to a company that provides the full service that can actually look at your business, tell you where VR or XR could be beneficial, and then walk you through the hardware, the software, getting it on the screens?
I can't speak for other companies because I've seen a lot, the last 3, 4, 5 years, companies jumping in different, content, hardware, integration. We've been forced to do it. So we've been doing it for 20 years. So we got to build our own camera rooms. We had to design our own workflows and tools if necessary. So it's second nature to us. We do that now. When we talk with clients, they go, I want to use VR, or I want to use AR, or I want to use 360 video. So okay, let's just take a step back. What are you trying to achieve? And is the technology even useful for this? We did a lot of live streaming from red carpets. We did Academy Awards, Emmys, Grammys, Golden Globes, all the award shows. And from the red carpet, so you have this red carpet coming down, people get interviews, and we have this 360 camera back here, and you get a great view of what's going on. You're up close and personal with celebrities and looking around. And the first time we did it, it was on People Magazine, People.com. They had hundreds of thousands of viewers that were tracking the same. People were just retending the engagement is longer than 360 video than is traditional, conventional. So what happened was, after we went ahead and did that, the executives from Time Warner called and said, hey, look, we want to do the next show, but can you block out the back end of the camera? Because they're looking back there, and the people who were interviewing the celebrities, they were trading off. It's real hot in LA, really doing LA Live area. And they were putting lipsticks on, or they're on their cell phones, or adjusting their clothing, whatever. And we said, sure, we'll do 180. Then it makes it easier for us. It's less data. We can get high resolution. We have to worry about stitching. So the different things like that. So we always look at it and say, really, what good is 360 if you're looking at a wall, right? It's the same thing looking down, looking up, and we take all those factors into consideration, as well as the ergonomics as far as people, what kind of working environment are they in? Is it really hot? Is it really cold? Throughput. Are you using a situation where you have hundreds of people coming through all the time? Because if you're using a VR headset, then you have to worry about sanitation to some degree. There's lots of different variables involved. And that's why it's kind of complex and a little scary to a lot of people right now. It's second nature to us, and that's our job to explain why it's not as scary as you might think. It's easier to come, and that's usually a barrier to entry in a lot of regards. It's just lack of knowledge because they don't have experience.
Great. Let's thank our speakers for that.
Can you guys hear me on the microphone? Yes. I was told that I stand still, I shouldn't have any breaks in the voice, so we'll see how that goes. We're going to try out the high ones.
So I'm here today to
So, oh wait, maybe it is, right here. Okay, here we go, sweet spot. So, I'm here to actually show you the practical implementation of virtual reality for training. We've had several of our speakers allude to using VR for basically training and education. Note, we do a little bit of mixed reality in my lab, but primarily we focus on VR, and I'll explain in a second why.
So specifically what we've been working on, there it goes again, specifically what we've been working on is basically robotic operating rooms.
Okay, so this is basically the way that most surgeries will occur today. Instead of just laparoscopic surgery where the surgeon is at the patient, instead he'll use this robot to assist him. The reason for this is basically he has much more control, he's much less likely to make a mistake, and in general it's supposed to increase the efficiency of the operating room. So basically you have the surgeon operating at the console, you have the robot inside the patient, and then you have the vision cart, which basically you have your assistants around the operating room helping you out. Now, the good news is there's lots of training for the surgeons. So basically companies like Intuitive Surgical, who create the Da Vinci surgical robot, they create these VR simulators where basically surgeons can train in these VR simulations using the actual surgeon console, and they go through this. Additionally, they also have these assistant consoles where basically you can have an experienced surgeon basically watching as the novice surgeon goes through surgery, and then he could basically interject and assist if there's an emergency in the surgery. That's really good. Well, what about the non-surgeon OR staff that supports the surgeon? You would hope that they get lots of training opportunities, right? Because they're responsible for things like inserting instruments and endoscopes into the arms of the robot, adjusting the arms of the robot when basically there's collisions that the surgeon can't see, and just generally making sure that everything in the OR is properly being maintained. Here's the scary part. They get limited training. So normally what happens when a company like Intuitive Surgical sells a robot to a hospital, they send a sales rep basically to the hospital who trains the A team. The A team is basically your Monday through Friday weekday operating room team, okay? The other teams, your weeknight teams and your weekend teams, are trained by your A team. Now, how many people want to learn something from a student who took a class from a world-class professor? No, you don't want to learn from the student, you want to learn from the professor. Additionally, there's lots of workshops all across the country and the world for these surgeons to go to. Unfortunately, there's very few workshops that the non-surgeon staff can actually go to. Additionally, their ability to practice is almost zero. First off, these robots are in constant operation, usually Monday from like early in the morning all the way through possibly Friday or Saturday afternoon, depending on how the operating room works. But more importantly, there's limited supplies. Every single time you insert an instrument, it decrements a life, okay? Each instrument only has 10 lives. These instruments cost hundreds of dollars, thousands, some of them, to replace. So how many hospitals do you think are going to tell their staff, sure, go practice, we don't care that you're spending or wasting thousands of dollars practicing your skills?
No, they basically say don't practice your skills.
So this is basically where consumer VR comes into play. Now, there are two consumer VR kind of modalities. We have mobile VR, like your Samsung Gear VR, there's Jerome somewhere. And then you have your room scale VR, which is like your HTC Vive or your Oculus Rift. The difference between these is basically mobile VR allows you to look around your environment 360 degrees, but it has no translational tracking, which means you cannot walk like I'm doing right now. It also means that you have no hand controls. While they do have a hand controller, it only affords rotational tracking, so there's limitations there. Room scale VR, you can actually walk, you can crouch, you can jump if you want to technically. And you also have these controllers that track the exact position of your hands, which afford us abilities for training. Just real briefly, both of these technologies, this has been mentioned before about immersing the user in the environment. Basically what that means is when you turn your head, you're going to see some portion of the virtual environment. Okay, so it's not like a monitor where you're just looking at a monitor. You can look all the way around you 360 degrees. All VR technologies support this. They should. Additionally, they all provide depth information via stereoscopic cues. So basically you have a distinct left eye and a distinct right eye image. Your brain basically fuses these two images together and provides you an additional depth view. This is what helps you determine how far away objects are from you, right? And basically this has been found very useful for tasks within the first 10 feet of interaction. Now, the other thing that room scale affords you is realistic 3D interaction. Now, this isn't a consumer VR system. This is actually our lab from 2014, 2 years before the HTC Vive came out. But it's basically the same thing. We have a head-mounted display that the user can walk around. In the lower right-hand corner, you're seeing what the user is seeing, which is a virtual operating room. You'll see here in a second that the user can actually crouch and look below the table if he wants to. That's nice. We also use two Nintendo Wii remotes with a Vicon motion tracking system to afford hand interactions, just like the HTC Vive. And we use those types of interactions to enable realistic 3D interactions that you would see in the real world. So here's an example of us interacting with a virtual DaVinci Xi system. Basically, you're able to use your hands to activate the port clutches, the instrument clutches on this robot. We also have inverse kinematics implemented on this robot. You'll see here in a second, we have the ability to basically pick up objects, insert objects, hand objects in between our hands. So here, we're basically manipulating the arm. Notice that we have a much better version now, actually. So those are the instrument clutches. Here I'm going to pick up an object. I'm going to actually pass it off between my hands. I'm going to insert that object. That's basically an instrument, a surgical instrument. And you can also remove these instruments as well. So super realistic 3D interactions. Now another advantage is most of these VR controllers have tactile feedback, which basically means they have a little LRA motor inside of them, just like you have in your smartphone. So just like your smartphone vibrates, we can control control the amplitude and frequency of these motors to give you different types of tactile stimulation. So for example, we could have a very violent, rapid frequency vibration to indicate something to you, or we could use a lower frequency, right? So we're exploring ways of using this tactile feedback to convey better information to the user. Now, let's talk about the limitations. Oh, actually, I think I skipped a slide. Yes, I did. One last thing that we would like to say, and this is the reason we are focused on consumer VR technology. It is portable. So we can basically take an HTC Vive, which is right there in the black box. We can take a VR-ready laptop, which is in the backpack, and we can take 2 tripods. We can hop on a plane, take this Dell past to Texas, and give a demo to Raytheon if we want to. I've done that. We also have this set up over here, so later on after my talk, you get to try out one of our VR demos. So the nice thing is this is portable, so you can take this to hospitals, you can take it to training facilities, you can take it wherever you want to very easily, unlike some of the prior VR technologies we've seen.
How much does it weigh?
How much does it weigh? The laptop is the heaviest part. The laptop is probably about 8 pounds. You can probably get a little lower today now. The Vive is probably 3 or 4 pounds, and the tripods are 3 or 4, so not very much. Easy to transport, probably easier than musical instruments. Now, let's talk about the limitations of consumer VR technologies. Oftentimes, VR experts and enthusiasts will not tell you what the limitations are, but I believe it's very important to talk about. Number one, there's a lack of force feedback. So let's say that there's the virtual wall in the middle of your tracking space. There is nothing that's going to stop the user from walking through that wall. Nothing, okay? Think about it. There's just physical empty space, and just because there's a virtual wall in the middle does not mean that user is going to get stopped. Now, there are some things in software that we can do to make it appear as if he's not able to go through the wall, but that basically means that we have to change the mapping through the virtual space and the physical space. But more importantly, it means when you pick up an object, there is no weight. When you try to put your hand through a table, there is no resistance. So you'll see these funny videos online of people thinking that they can rest on a virtual table and they end up falling to the ground. Kind of funny, but also scary at the same time. In addition to lack of force feedback, another problem is virtual travel. So most VR devices are anywhere from like 2.5 meters to 4 meters tracking space, okay? Now what that means is if your virtual environment is as small as 4 meters by 4 meters, great, you don't need any virtual travel. But if you have a very large virtual environment that requires more than 4 meters by 4 meters, like this haul truck application that we've been working on, you need some form of virtual travel. Now the issue with virtual travel in the past, people have done steering, just like what you see in the video games, right? Problem with steering and head-mounted displays is it causes simulator sickness because you get basically cue conflicts between your visual system, which is telling you that you're moving, and your vestibular system, which is telling you that you are not moving, right? And then that doesn't work very well, and your brain makes you sick, essentially. Now, that's one reason a lot of video games have used this teleporting technique. Unfortunately, teleporting has been shown to decrease spatial knowledge, so we're still trying to figure out the best way of doing virtual travel. And finally, I'm going to say VR is not universally accessible. There will always be a small percentage of the population that will get sick in VR no matter what. I don't think that there's any technological issue that's going to improve it unless we can get to 1,000 frames per second. There is research that shows that people can actually distinguish at 1 millisecond frame rate, so that means you would need 1,000 frames per second to be able to get past that. And I think we're a little ways off. So back to the OR. This is why we want to use VR. We can basically use gross motor skills with VR, so we can have these realistic 3D interactions to help train skills, which we already showed you. The lack of force feedback is not critical, right? These gross motor skills of manipulating the robot, not that important. What the surgeon is doing, very important. That's the reason we don't focus on the surgeon. And we can also address limited training and practice. The portability allows us to take this anywhere, anytime, and it also does not waste limited supplies. You can insert that instrument 1 million times and you will never cost the hospital an additional penny. So we basically work very closely with Intuitive Surgical to identify a troubleshooting scenario because we said, well, let's see how far we can push VR. This scenario, basically, the surgeon's in the middle of operation, the robot malfunctions. This actually happens. Specifically, one of the arms is malfunctioned. You basically, at this point, would go through attempting a restart, hoping that the system recovers itself. If that doesn't work at this point, if the instrument is grasping tissue, you have to unlock the instrument using advanced language. Once you unlock that instrument and it's no longer grasping tissue, you can now basically remove the instrument, stow the arm, and then proceed with the procedure with only 3 arms. So this was our first attempt. We created this application last fall. We actually took it out to Sunnyvale, California, and put it in front of 7 nurses. We got great feedback. I don't think I have sound working up here, which is good. That means I can just talk over. There are voices. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to hear those. But basically, we have this dialogue system. There's 2 virtual agents. We have a virtual surgeon, and we also have a virtual non-sterile staff member. These are not controlled by real humans. We basically have very rudimentary AI behind them driving them. Essentially, we have a storyboard that drives the entire training simulation. So basically, you walk through this process. The first step is basically asking the non-sterile staff member to restart the system, because you're crossing your fingers, hoping and praying that that's going to fix the issue. We actually timed this. We got real troubleshooting video from Into the Surgical. Everything is timed right down to the dot, to the second. So this is exactly how long you would have to wait in real life for the system to restart. So part of what we're training is patients here. Once the system restarts, basically you as the staff member, you'll continue to interact with the non-sterile staff member and the surgeon. What you're going to do is basically you're going to disable the arm. After you disable the arm, we then get past the dialogue interactions and we go to full-blown 3D interactions, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. Maybe I can actually skip ahead. Here we go. So we're at the point now where you're going to ask the non-sterile staff for the instrument release kit. Remember that fancy Allen wrench I mentioned? So the instrument release kit is normally held in the vision card, so the non-sterile staff member has to get it in a pill pack. They have to open the pill pack, and you as the sterile staff member have to pull it out. So now that you have this instrument release kit, the first thing you're told to do is you're supposed to read it. So you basically read the instrument release kit, tells you that you should press the emergency stop button first, and then basically you should use it to unlock the arm. So you ask the surgeon to basically press the emergency stop button. We have nice audio sounds of the system stopping because Into the Surgical was nice enough to share those. You insert the Allen wrench, turn it 1/4 turn counterclockwise. This basically ungrasps the tissue. You then pull the Allen wrench out, and you should put it on the back table. Now, we use Unity Engine to implement everything. That is Unity's physics fault, not ours. We're working on that though. We did miss an animation there, that's our fault. Here in a second, you're going to see our unimanual inverse kinematics. We had to reverse engineer Intuitive Surgical's robot. We only were able to get unimanual interactions working. At this point in time, we now have bimanual decentralized inverse kinematics working. That was one of the #1 requests that we got from the 7 nurses that we threw this in front of last year. And then basically you proceed with asking them to use the touch screen to basically recover the emergency call. And this was all developed in just a couple months. Now, the module was all developed in a couple months. Everything leading up to the module took several months. Asset development, I can't express how important artists are. So a little background here. Intuitive basically provided us their CAD models. Their CAD models were humongous. Basically, they crushed Unity game engine. We tried some mesh simplification algorithms. Those all failed, looked terrible. We even created our own mesh simplification algorithm, got a couple publications off that. That still was not sufficient enough. Ultimately, we hired an artist to come back and basically create us a low poly version. So you need artists if you want to get into doing art. I do have to acknowledge that our work is supported by Intuitive Surgical and the National Science Foundation. And if you want to learn a lot more about VR, I highly recommend picking up a copy of my book, 3D User Interfaces Theory and Practice, 2nd edition. Any questions? I tried to be fast and cover time. Yes?
What is the research aspect of all this as opposed to the practical?
Well, so the way that I view it, the practical training gives us a great test bed for research. So what we've been doing is we use this application here as a test bed for investigating stuff like what visual feedback techniques should we use to basically get the user's attention inside of the training module, right? What type of pseudo haptics could we use to give you a sensation of force in the virtual environment when there's no sensation, actual physical sensation of force? We also are exploring ways that you should construct these training modules, right? There's lots of different approaches out there. We've surveyed them. We're in the process now of basically going through a research pattern and determining exactly what are the key events that you need to retain for each educational concept that you're trying to train. So basically, it gives us a real-world test bed for lots of scientific questions. Yes?
Has there been any, the manipulating tools, those little T-shaped things, has there any experiment been done with actually using articulating hands that would make the whole thing a lot more.
It would actually make it much worse, and let me explain why. So basically, we have tons of hand tracking technologies out there, right? First problem is, half of them don't work very well. The ones that actually do work very well, they then have to implement physics for picking up objects, okay? Now think of it this way. If every single time you pick up an object, right, in the real world, you get nice tactile feedback, you get force feedback from picking up that object, so you know whether or not you're applying the proper pressure to an object to pick it up. But in virtual reality, you don't get that, unless you have an exoskeleton glove, and to be honest, those don't work very well. So what happens is, you get an interaction technique that's only usable about 90% of the time. Now, how many times would you want to open up your web browser and only 90% of the time it sent you to the website that you wanted to go to? You wouldn't use it, right? That little button on the handheld controllers, 99.9% of the time it's going to do exactly what you want. And that's the reason that we use the handheld controllers. Because ultimately, we're not trying to teach you fine motor skills of your fingers, we're trying to teach you the overall cognitive process, and that 99.9% is much more important than the 90% and having, ooh, my hands interact in virtual reality. Sorry, I've gotten that question a lot of times.
Yeah. Thank you. So is this actually used right now in hospitals, or are you moving towards it?
We are currently designing an efficacy study with the University of Rochester Medical Center. We are basically going to directly compare this to hands-on physical-based simulation. Our hypothesis is that basically we will have the same degree of training transfer, that logistically we will be much better, and at that point it's kind of up to the manufacturer whether or not they want to proceed forward with the product.
Currently, only one person participates in the training.
At a time, yes, but we do have the possibility of introducing multi-user capabilities, because ultimately we are using the Unity game engine. Plenty of people make multiplayer games, so we could do the same thing. Realistically though, the reason that we focus on AI is because it's about efficiency, right? How many times do you want to train and have to coordinate the rest of your team to also train? You don't want to do that. It's much easier to just pop into the system and basically train whenever you want to and have these virtual agents that you can interact with.
There'll be a question to this point, but don't you want to see the interaction between the same room?
It depends on what you're trying to train. If you're trying to train social skills, then yes, absolutely. If you're trying to train the cognitive procedure for a step, I ultimately would argue that AI will do just as well. Any other questions? All right, thank you. One last moment. If you want to try this very specific demo, it's down on the end of the hall. So basically, you just go down to the end. My students have it set up. They will welcome you. They'll introduce you. They'll let you try out VR.
Thank you. And I think we also have some equipment over here as well.
That's right. So for this one, because these are very small devices, what I would like to suggest is we have a couple of devices, and maybe instead of having everybody to align here, why don't we just pass them around?
Okay.
That's
That's fine. So we have some people that will rotate over here and get a sense of the VR headsets as well, and then devices here. So we have a couple of practical applications. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about where the technology is, got to see kind of the maturity of the technology and understand its direction forward. There's a lot of still experimentation going on in the enterprise right now around this. It's not too late. But if you aren't experimenting today, then you're probably falling behind. So we hope that everybody enjoyed today. And again, we have a couple of demos, so please take advantage of that. And thank you for today.